All right. Welcome to Pro-Life Thinking, a podcast that trains you how to defend the pro-life position in a way that's effective and persuasive. And here we go. Okay. Brought Nathan on here. We're live now.
Right on cue.
So yeah.
And I see you've already got your Christmas tree up.
Yep. Yeah, of course, this is just my bedroom here. It's not the main tree for the house, but yeah, got a little, trying to get in the Christmas spirit early. So I figured since well, actually the camera is up a little bit, so you don't really see the bookshelf behind me, but I figured I'd, go ahead and make it a little more festive, get myself in the Christmas spirit and show the tree on camera. So, yeah. All right. Well, we're going to cover some of the news items. I only have a few for discussion here today, but before we begin, I actually received an email from a site called let me bring it up here, called Pod Status, and I looked into it, and it is a legitimate site, so I'm guessing he probably wants to try and drum up some interest in it. But I got an email here from a guy named Carlos who runs a website called Pod Status, and says that he has some cool information that might interest us. And he says that our podcast Pro-Life Thinking has good performance in some rankings in the last 30 days. We in the Philippines, we're ranked 7th in the category politics and 36th in the category of news. So that was I thought that was pretty cool. To our Filipino listeners out there, thanks for your support. We appreciate you listening in. Okay, so the first topic for discussion today is actually, and well, I don't really need to share the screen just yet. The famous pro-choice philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson passed away a little over a week ago. It was on November 20th was the day that she passed, and yeah, I didn't actually hear how it was. I don't see it. I don't see it mentioned here. So yeah, I'm getting kind of an echo there, Nathan. Do you have a? Okay, I think it sounds like it's gotten better.
Yeah. I think my speaker was up too loud.
Okay, yeah. So I don't see it mentioned here how she died, but yeah, that's newsworthy, of course, especially regards abortion, because Judith Jarvis Thomson wrote a famous essay in 1971 called "A Defense of Abortion," in which she expounded her famous violinist thought experiment, which is sort of the thorn in the side of pro-life advocates, because everyone who is educated in philosophy and every first-year philosophy student that we come across will be familiar with the argument and try to use it in conversation.
Yeah, and I would actually say it's probably a thorn in the side of the pro-choice movement, because they always like to punt to that argument. Anybody who's taken a philosophy class will punt to that argument, and they don't realize that the argument has been responded to multiple times over the last 50 years since it was written. It's not an original argument, and it's been responded to. It's been updated. David Boonen's done updates on it.
Yeah, and we're not going to respond to the argument here. It's not really my desire to do that, because we're talking about a philosopher who just recently passed away, and so we're not trying to negate that or anything like that. I just kind of wanted to bring it up and talk a little bit about some of her other work, because she's done a lot of work in philosophy. The violinist thought experiment and the defense of abortion article is probably what she's most well known for, but something that's a little less known is that she's probably the philosopher who's done the most work on the Trolley thought experiment. A little known fact is that a pro-life philosopher named Philippa Foot wrote an article in which she was talking about talking about life-saving abortions and double effect, because she was not convinced by double effect reasoning, and so she was actually using the Trolley thought experiment in the course of talking about double effect. It's been a while since I've read the essay, so I'm not really going to talk too much about it. We may, who knows, we may do it at some point because it does have applications to the abortion issue. But so Philippa Foot was actually the one who first expounded the trolley thought experiment, and Judith Jarvis Thomson actually came across that thought experiment, thought it was very interesting, and wanted to do a lot of work on it. And so she later on she wrote an article about the trolley thought experiment, but I believe she actually wrote a book about it too. I've not read the book, but I do have her article here also. So she part of her work has actually done a lot on the trolley thought experiment. And she's actually done a lot of work in moral philosophy, too. In fact, I'd come across an article that she wrote on utilitarianism, which actually I thought was actually a pretty devastating critique about utilitarianism. That one I wasn't able to find anywhere. I read it some time ago, but for whatever reason, it seems to have disappeared from my collection of academic articles that I've printed out. But yeah, so that's just some of the other work that she's done besides her work in abortion. I thought it was worth pointing out.
You think you'd be able to sum up some of the points in the article about utilitarianism?
Well, not today. Like I said, I wasn't able to find it. I wanted to read it again and kind of review her points, but no, I wouldn't be able to summarize those today, just because I wasn't able to read it before our broadcast here today. But the article itself is definitely worth reading. And, utilitarianism, actually moral philosophy, has a lot to do with abortion too. So at some point we may end up talking about it, reviewing some of these other articles on the Trolley thought experiment and utilitarianism. So, yeah. So, Judith Jarvis Thomson, rest in peace. And, so moving on from that, comes a little bit more of a bizarre news article. Now I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. It kind of wigged out on me last time, so hopefully it'll be okay this time. But we'll see how it goes, though. Okay, and here we have that Spaceballs effect again. All right, so here, this is an article that was published in New York Post, and it's called "Makers of Grow Your Own Human Steaks Say Meal Kit is Not Technically Cannibalism." And so the article for it, or the title for the article, kind of says it all, that this is basically a way to grow food from human cells, essentially. So you can grow your own human meat for consumption. And so this has a couple of applications. That number one, if you're able to grow your own, grow food or grow meat from your own cells, well, you don't have to actually start consuming animals. A lot of vegans and vegetarians would say that it's wrong to consume meat. And there are a number of pro-life people who are vegans and vegetarians also. So, I'm not sure if to, because I'm not a vegan or vegetarian, obviously, and I have my own thoughts on this, which I'll say in a minute. But as for the vegans and vegetarians who are pro-life, I'm not sure if their compunction is just with the fact that you have to kill the animal in order to consume it, or if they think if you can grow your own animal meat in a laboratory, if they would think that would be morally acceptable to consume animal meat grown in a lab as long as you don't have to actually kill the animal. So I'm not sure where they would land on that. But where, of course, I would land on that, because this is a one of the aspects of bioethics is in what kind of thing something is. And so just because you can grow human meat in a lab doesn't necessarily mean that it's permissible to consume that human meat, because you're consuming something that is human. And so something that is human has an intrinsic value, has if it really is cannibalism to consume human meat, regardless of it, if whether it comes from yourself or not, well, then it would be impermissible to consume it anyway. I don't know if go ahead and add some thoughts on this if you want. I'll give you a chance to speak up, and then I can talk a little bit more about this here.
Frankly, well, I guess I could say, a lot of bioethicists might have a beef with this issue.
Well, yeah, that's true.
But what goes through somebody's mind that they would want to even bother giving this a try? Like, hey, let's see if we can grow human meat and then see if it tastes good enough to consume it. I mean, what goes through somebody's mind that that's a smart idea? Like,
Yeah. Well, I've called up the New York Post article here, and they actually do talk about that a bit. It's called the Ouroboros steak, after the circular symbol of a snake eating itself tail first, because, of course, that's symbolic of the fact that if you pursue this as a form of meal, you'll essentially be eating yourself, and so that's where the symbolism of the snake eating itself and the calling it the Ouroboros steak comes from. So it says here that it's not a product available to buy. It was created by scientist Andrew Pelling, artist Orkan Tilhan and Knight, an industrial designer, on commission by the Philadelphia Museum of Art for an exhibit last year. So it's not something that is available yet, but it's something that I think scientists are working toward. And they're definitely working toward growing meat in the lab too, because that way you don't have to, kill animals for it. And so here, hold on, I've got some dogs barking in the background there. Hopefully it's not being picked up. But yeah, so here we have the line of why they want to actually grow meat based on your own cells. So here, a website for this product states that, quote, growing yourself ensures that you and your loved ones always know the origin of your food, how it has been raised, and that its cells were acquired ethically and consensually, end quote. So essentially the reason that they're saying they want to grow meat based on your own cells, which of course makes it human meat, is that you know the origin of your food, you know how your food has been raised, and you know that the cells were acquired, what they call ethically. Of course that kind of begs the question, because then the question is, well, why wouldn't killing animals for food be ethical? That's a question that we need to address. And then, of course, consensually. But of course, if animals don't have rights, then there's no ethical problem with not getting their consent before using them for food. So yeah, right. So this news story here kind of has a couple of different kind of raises a couple of ethical questions. Number one, is it permissible in the first place to consume animals for food, especially if you have to kill them for it? And number two, is it permissible to eat human meat for food, even if it comes from yourself? One of the statements here in the article is that eating yourself is not technically cannibalism. And let me see if I can find, because there's a statement in here that goes into a little more detail about why the person doesn't think it's actually cannibalism.
I think one thought that I would add to this is it seems to be an underlying assumption that it is consent that makes or breaks whether or not this is a moral idea, and saying that this that way you can make sure this way if you what's the word I'm looking for? If you purchase our product or you're able to grow your own meat, then that way you can know right here, this line where it says, growing yourself ensures that you and your loved ones always know the origin of your food, how it has been raised, and that its cells were acquired ethically and consensually. And you kind of hit on this a little bit, is why is it so important to have consent in this case? And Chris Kaiser actually points this out in his book, his recent book on bioethics, when we interviewed him a few weeks ago. He makes a good point in there. As he said, he goes, why do we need to make such a big deal about consent? Well, human beings, we respect the consent of other human beings because they are human in the first place. That's what gives us, because humans have intrinsic dignity, that's why we have an obligation to respect their consent. And that's what's kind of making me wonder here, is I'm going, why is consent the sole basis for what makes this ethically acceptable? And well, it's because human beings have intrinsic dignity. Well, if human beings have intrinsic dignity, then should we be growing essentially human body parts in order to consume them? That doesn't really follow from the moral principle they're employing here.
Yeah, and I didn't find where it said it in the article. It seems like they're just saying that eating yourself is technically not cannibalism. And so, of course, that's an assumption too, because from what I understand of the definition of cannibalism, it's just eating a member of one's own species, and you are a member of your species, which would make it cannibalism. So calling it not technically cannibalism to try and make this more palatable for people to support, it's just relying on a false definition of what cannibalism actually is. Now, right. It's removing the moral problem of you don't have to kill someone to take their meat, but you're still consuming human flesh, which has ethical problems.
Right.
So yeah. So it might make so again, I don't know how vegans or vegetarians would address this kind of problem, but for someone, for someone who takes a stance on human consumption, that it's always ethically wrong to consume human flesh, well, then this kind of thing won't be an ethical solution to eating animals or anything like that.
I think part of it goes into there is a concern right now among a lot of environmentalists that a lot of our dietary habits are not sustainable. So when you go to the grocery store, you'll see in the freezer aisle, they'll have sustainable meat or sustainable fish, partially because a lot of fish and meat has been overconsumed, and so it's really hard to sustain it. So that's where a lot of the big push is for laboratory production of meat. So laboratory produced beef. That way, you don't have so much resources going to feeding a herd of cattle that's eventually going to be slaughtered. Or same thing with fish, is that way we don't have to worry about fish populations being overfished or overhunted, and that way we can continue sustaining it. So that's a big part of the reason why there's a push for laboratory produced meat, not necessarily for the vegan or vegetarian community, although that is a large part of it, but it's also because of the environmental concerns right now.
Yeah, and that's something I can get behind too. Growing, if it's safe to consume lab-grown meat, I can get behind consuming meat grown in a laboratory, so that we can, so that we can try not, to prevent certain animal groups from going extinct, like fish and in certain game animals and things like that. But again, I don't think it's immoral to kill animals for food, because I don't think that they're they don't have any sort of rights to life or bodily integrity or anything like we do. And so I don't believe that means that we can then torture animals, because I think the fact that they are sentient beings that can feel pain, I think that matters. And I think that we should not unjustly torture them or anything like that. But I don't think there's anything ethically problematic with consuming them for food. But again, if we can safely grow meat in the lab where we can save animal species from going extinct, and that's something I can get behind too. But not if it comes to actually growing human flesh for consumption, even if it comes from me. That's just, there's a cultural taboo against that. But, if you believe that there's something inherently, there's nothing really inherently sacred about the flesh itself. But the fact that it comes from a human, there's certain things, if you believe in the sanctity of human life, then there are certain things that we shouldn't be doing to a human. We shouldn't be consuming humans, even if you can do it without killing them. We shouldn't be cloning humans, things like that. So, but again, that's a discussion that could take up a whole show by itself, or several shows, in fact. So, okay, and then moving on to the last news item that I had for today. This is a bit more of a somber one. Of course, we're going through this whole coronavirus COVID-19 thing, where certain our governors are basically requiring us to be on lockdown, and they're something that a lot of people don't seem to be considering, because obviously we want to keep people safe. We don't want them catching COVID-19, especially if you're in one of the groups of people who are at the greatest risk of it, who are the elderly or people with a comorbidity or something like that. We want to make sure we're keeping these people safe. But what is not being really talked about is the toll that lockdown is taking on people. I've seen studies that say that the suicide rates have risen pretty dramatically since lockdown began. And so here I have a couple of stories from the news. And again, all of these news stories I put in the well, it'll go in the show notes for the podcast, but I've also put it on the YouTube page, where you can see the description. Yeah, the description, that's what I was looking for. So it's in the description on the YouTube page also. So here, this was made, I was made aware of this by some friends that I have in Baltimore, that the school shutdown drove a teen at school to depression and suicide. And so this is something that needs to be dealt with as well. But there's something even more egregious that is going on here. But this kind of shows that the lockdown itself is something that is taking too much of a toll on human beings, because humans are not made for isolation. They say that, for example, in prison, if a police officer or a warden puts puts a criminal in solitary confinement for a day or more, they call that cruel and unusual punishment. And so now we're doing this to people who haven't committed any crimes, all in the name of trying to keep them safe from this illness, which has a very, very, very high rate of survivability. So it's not even like we're dealing with the Black Plague or anything like that here, but we are in fact dealing with something that is more dangerous than the flu. You know, we don't want to downplay the danger of COVID, but it's not like we're dealing with something that is exceptionally dangerous like the Black Plague or anything like that.
Right.
And so, yeah, so this kind of thing is having a toll on people, especially on kids who aren't able to go and be social around other kids their age or around even their own family members.
Right. And this is definitely a case, unfortunately. I mean, and people who have supported the lockdowns, there is a lot of good intention behind it. I mean, nobody wants to see a family member get sick with COVID-19, especially family members and friends who are at risk. But at the same time, unfortunately, there has been a lot of good intentions outweighing wisdom and clear thinking about what the possible ramifications will be. And Thomas Sowell has a really good book on this called Visions of the Anointed, where he points out how public policy over the last 150 years that has been driven by good intentions, but disconnected from wisdom and clear thinking, has actually done a lot of damage, whether it be in regards to crime and policing, whether it be in regards to he has a section about the effects of birth control on the unplanned pregnancy rate, which is obviously of interest to pro-lifers. And then lastly, this year with just the COVID lockdowns, there's been a lot of good intentions behind it saying, oh, well, if we don't want people to die from COVID-19. Well, obviously nobody does. Nobody's open to that. The problem is if you disconnect that and say, well, what are the possible outcomes or the ramifications for locking everybody down? And we're starting to see those outcomes. There was another article that suicides within the military and the veteran community are up higher than they've ever been because of the COVID lockdowns. Because human beings were made as social creatures, were made to be in relationship with everybody else. And it's taking a large toll on people. And unfortunately, this is another example that just because you have good intentions, it doesn't mean you're going to choose the wisest option when it comes to public policy. And that's unfortunately playing out right now.
Yeah, and this article here is from Fox 5 News, and they actually have some stats here about the rising numbers of anxiety and depression, where they talk about how the full impact of the COVID pandemic is not yet known, but early numbers are alarming. In August, the CDC reported symptoms here, and in 2019, if we're just talking about anxiety, 8% of people, in fact, I think this is just, let's see. Oh yeah, this is people ages 18 to 24. So in 2019, people ages 18 to 24, 8% of those people had anxiety. And in 2020, that number rose dramatically up to 25% of young people from 18 to 24. And when it comes to depression, in 2019, 6% of people 18 to 24 had 6% of people 18 to 24 had depression. And in 2020, now that number has risen to 24%. And according to the same article, thoughts of suicide, especially among young people, are staggering. The same report found 26% of people 18 to 24 had considered suicide in just the past month, which is the month of August when this was published. So the lockdown is taking quite a toll on it. And now, cases of people committing suicide are bad enough, but there is one article that I came across written by Wesley J. Smith that actually does have implications for the larger bioethics issue as well. And so Wesley J. Smith here wrote an article about how an elderly woman in Canada was euthanized to avoid the anguish of lockdown loneliness. And so this is one of the reasons. There are a lot of reasons to argue against legalizing euthanasia, that have to do with things like, if you have a right to life and your rights are inalienable, then that means that you can't have a right to die, because an inalienable right means that you can't rightly have your right taken away and you can't rightly give your right away. For example, you can't sell yourself into slavery to pay off a debt if your right to freedom is inalienable. So if our right to life is inalienable, meaning it can't be taken away, that also means that it can't be given away. So we can't have a right to die because of our right to life. So, there are a lot of different reasons that, another reason would be that assisted suicide means that this is actually an act of homicide because a doctor is taking your life. It's not just you taking your own life. So you're actually asking a doctor to become complicit and an active participant in your own suicide. So there are a lot of ethical arguments against euthanasia, but a pragmatic argument against euthanasia is just that there's the argument that a right to die eventually becomes a duty to die, and you'll eventually be euthanized against your own will. But another one is that it really starts to people start to have lower and lower opinions about human life. Right. And so you start to justify more and more situations in which euthanasia is something that we can permit. And here we see in Canada, a woman, an elderly woman, was killed by her doctor because she would rather be dead than go through another COVID lockdown. So this COVID lockdown was so bad. In fact, actually, I'll go ahead and just read the article in full because it's actually pretty short. So this is from Wesley J. Smith. He says, an elderly Canadian woman was killed by her doctor because she would rather be dead than go through another COVID lockdown. When it looked like she would have to be confined to her room for 2 weeks, she asked for and received the lethal jab due to declining mental health and vitality, from the CTV story. Russell, described by her family as exceptionally social and spry, was one such person. Her family says she chose a medically assisted death, MAID, after she declined so sharply during lockdown that she didn't want to go through more isolation this winter. This time, doctors approved her. Russell would not have to go through another lockdown in her care home. She just truly did not believe that she wanted to try another one of those 2-week confinements into her room, her daughter said. But note for her death, she could be surrounded by friends and family. When 90-year-old Nancy Russell died last month, she was surrounded by friends and family. They clustered around her bed, singing a song she had chosen to send her off, as a doctor helped her through a medically assisted death. So companionship to be made dead, but not to remain alive. And her family thinks this was a fine option, demonstrating how the social mindset becomes twisted by euthanasia consciousness. But, we are told, killing to end suffering is oh so compassionate, and lockdowns are measures of good public health. Bah! And that's actually in the article. Those with eyes to see, let them see. So here we see that, an elderly patient can't see her own friends and family, but if she wants to kill herself, they'll allow the friends and family to be there present with her. And we also see the irrationality here, not just from a euthanasia mindset, but just that, we recognize COVID-19 as a danger to elderly people. So we want to lock everyone down to prevent elderly people from contracting a disease that could possibly kill them, but will allow euthanasia of an elderly person to kill herself to avoid the lockdown that we're instituting to try and keep her from getting that illness that might result in her death. It's insane.
Yeah, I remember when you and I were talking about this on Facebook the other day. I said, what kind of moral idiot can you be to think this even makes sense? That, we're going to lock you down for your own good so you don't get COVID-19 and die. But if you feel like that lockdown, that you'd rather be dead than be in lockdown again, we'll go ahead and kill you, even though the reason why you're in lockdown is so that you wouldn't catch COVID-19 and die. This is moral idiocy at its finest. I mean,
yeah.
How insane do you have to be to think this even remotely makes sense? And Jonathan Van Maren, in his book discussing assisted suicide, he makes a really good point. Is he says, when it comes to people saying, well, people have a right to die or they have a right to assisted suicide, he says, where do we draw the line? Suppose the 15-year-old boy who just broke up with his girlfriend, he's very depressed and he doesn't think life is worth living. Does he have a right to die? I don't think anybody would agree with that. So that means this whole idea of a right to die is actually not really much of a right to begin with. Because a right is something that cannot be taken away from us. But, certain types of rights. Like a natural right.
Yeah, I mean, we need to make a distinction between natural rights and legal rights. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point too. And that if there is a right to die, well, you can't just keep people from exercising their rights. And yet we all have a very a very strong intuition that someone who just kills themselves for no reason is doing something wrong and that they should prefer to continue living. And yet, if there really is such thing as a right to die, well, we can't just allow people who are terminally ill to exercise that right. But we should, if a teenage boy is dumped by his girlfriend and wants to kill himself, well, there's nothing, wrong with that. We should allow him to do it because he has a right to die. Well, that's not something that I think anyone would agree with. And so that shows that we don't actually have a right to die. So, the thought about killing someone who's terminally ill that we can't help, is grounded in a sense of compassion, but it's misplaced compassion, because killing someone is never a benefit to that person. The benefit to that person would be healing them. If it's not possible for us to heal someone from their ailment, killing them is not a benefit to that person. In fact, it removes any possibility that that person could ever potentially get better. This actually reminds me of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, which is largely hailed as one of the worst Star Trek films, but they actually address euthanasia in that film. This guy Sybok, who's the half brother of Spock, comes on the Enterprise and wants to help remove the pain from everybody. And it turns out one of McCoy's deepest pain was that as a doctor, he actually he euthanized his own father, but shortly thereafter, a cure for what the father had been created. And so if Dr. McCoy had just waited a little while longer, he would have had a cure for his father's ailment and wouldn't have had to kill him. So Dr. McCoy acted out of compassion, but by killing his father, he basically removed any sort of possibility that his father could have ever recovered from it.
Right.
So that's just one more. Like I said, there are a lot of things wrong with euthanasia, and this is just one of several reasons. All right. Well, those are the news items that I thought were, a couple of them kind of interesting, all of them worth talking about. So that's pretty much what we have for today. But coming up here on Thursday, and I brought my calendar so that I would make sure I could look it up. Because, coming up on Thursday, we have an interview that is going to be very interesting. And I know that a lot of people are actually looking forward to this interview. We're interviewing on Thursday, December 3rd. So coming up this next Thursday at 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific time, we're going to be bringing on Helen Watt, who is a doctor and works for the Anscombe Bioethics Center in Oxford, England. So this will actually be our first guest that we've had from across the pond. That's also why it's going to be a little bit earlier at 8 a.m. because that's actually 4 p.m. for Dr. Watt. And so we're going to talk to her about the ethics of pro-life people taking vaccines that were developed using fetal cells. And so I already know there are a number of people who are interested in this conversation who've been telling me on our pro-life thinking page and also just personally. So that's going to be a really, really good discussion.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you again for listening in. And again, thank you to the people in the Philippines for making our podcast such a popular one. Thanks again to Nathan for joining me for this discussion. Thanks to you for listening in. If you thought this discussion was beneficial, feel free to share this around social media, Facebook, Twitter, MeWe, Parler, wherever it is you frequent. And now, this is a weekly podcast, and it takes a lot of work to put together a podcast each week, on top of all of the things that we need to do to keep the information flowing in, to make sure we can keep on top of everything, the academic discussion, things like that. So if you have the means and would like to become a financial supporter of the podcast or of our pro-life work in general, you can go to the Life Training Institute website, which is www.prolifetraining.com, and you can go to the drop-down menu at the top. There's a place to donate. You can put my name in the donation, so they know to put your donation into my account. And there's a number of things for this podcast that we can use it for. One of those things being that I'd like to get a paid subscription to StreamYard, because there's a lot more bells and whistles we can use if we get a paid subscription to StreamYard. So if you'd like to donate toward that, that's a great way to do it. And donations to Life Training Institute are tax deductible. So once again,